Hello YouTube. This is going to be a quick tour of the AVH 4000 NEX Pioneer receiver. It's designed for use with CarPlay and it's designed for use with AppRadio. This being the end of June, we don't yet have firmware that will run CarPlay on this thing with Apple devices, but we do have AppRadio, and we do have AppRadio Live, which was just announced, I don't know, a week or so ago. So I'm going to avoid talking too much about the native features of the radio, and I'm going to focus instead on AppRadio and what you can do with AppRadio, because setting that up is kind of a pain in the butt, and you may want to look at this before you go to the trouble of hooking up AppRadio on your system. So the first thing you see when you even boot the thing up is a nanny warning about I guess the navigation features, and you have to hit OK before you can even use the radio. Then what will happen is the radio will tell the phone that it wants to activate the AppRadio app, and you have to allow that. So I'm allowing that. We log in, and now the Pioneer AppRadio app is running and is going to detect the radio. Then you get another nanny warning that says you got to apply the brake, release the brake, and apply the brake again in order to even use this feature, which is the stupidest thing I've ever heard of. I have a bypass in this installation, and I'm not going to tell you anything else about the bypass because it's sort of dangerous and I don't want to get sued, so don't install a bypass the way I did. But my bypass has this radio convinced that I have in fact done this, applied, release, and applied the brake. So if you're having problems with your radio, it's probably because you haven't got the brake hookup done or you don't have a bypass. So, yes to the nanny warning. And now we have a menu of available apps. Now, what we see here is a video stream being projected onto the radio screen by the phone. And so it's the AppRadio app that's producing this image. And when I scroll around, this interface is all being supplied by this AppRadio app. Let's start with AppRadio Live, which is brand new. Let me begin by pointing out that this app, the AppRadio app, has had consistently very poor reviews in the App Store. Everybody hates it. I'm not a big fan of it either. But, I mean, all it is a menu of available other apps. Let's start AppRadio Live. And you see on my phone that we switch from one AppRadio app to the newer AppRadio app. It takes a moment to get everything recognized, and all of a sudden we have this, which is kind of cool. We see some calendar integration. We see some weather data at the top right, perhaps. We see some internet radio stuff. We see the ability to navigate. And if I tap here, we see that this is being displayed by INRIX. I don't know anything about INRIX. It seems okay. One of the things I like about it is that if I want to navigate somewhere, say to a nearby restaurant, traditional American, how about let's go to good old Sherry's, and I say go there, I can navigate there as you see with the INRIX app, but what I really like is this button over here that allows me to activate some other navigation app. I don't know INRIX, I don't like INRIX, but I'll tell you what I do like. I like Waze. By the way, Motion X, as it struggles to download the icon for Motion X, that's kind of funny. Motion X has been around for a long time. They want $20 to integrate, there it is, to integrate with AppRadio. So that's not happening. But Waze is free and Waze is great. So we're going to launch Waze. And what happens is Waze launches, and before long, Waze realizes that it's talking to AppRadio, and it goes into AppRadio mode. Watch. Done. So now we have this.
71st Avenue.
And it's not perfect. You see it's cut off at the bottom, which is not great. But there's a timer at the bottom. So in a minute, we're in full navigation mode here. And you can scroll around, and you can zoom out and zoom in, and it's Waze on your phone, on your head unit, which is kind of why I wanted to play with AppRadio in the first place. You have most but not all of the features. If you like being able to share your drive, you can't do that from this interface because they don't think you should do that because it's dangerous or something. So that's Waze. You notice along the left side, CarPlay is going to be affected this way as well. There's a huge waste of screen space along the left side. This is the portion of the screen that's being projected by the app. And on the left side, you've got the overall source selection menu that applies to the overall radio. We're in HDMI AppRadio mode. Then you have a button that will take you back to the overall AppRadio top menu, which everybody hates. Then you've got a button that will take you to the phone interface, which is familiar. This is the same phone interface displayed by the radio itself without AppRadio mode. And then you've got here the ability to sort of create a lower strip that scales down the rest of the image even more. And sometimes when you're playing music or whatever, the metadata for the music will show up along the bottom there. And if you tap on the date, you can set the date. That's kind of handy. So now, what if I want to play music? One approach is to find an app that's compatible with this whole AppRadio system. This is a fool's errand, I think. I mean, you've got a few apps that are available. You've got Car Media Play, which is very poorly reviewed. You've got Mix Tracks, which is, I think, quite stupid. You've got EC Touch, which is an interesting option, except that it's not free. I mean, there's really not a great app for playing music. There's no Spotify support. If you look at the Pioneer Car Media Player, you get this, which is okay, I guess. It looks like an Apple TV. It was designed probably to look like Apple TV, and you can scrub. And that's cool. Now, if I go to something else, I'm still hearing music. I still see the metadata along here. And if I was to go back to AppRadio Live, what happens? All this switching and the delay from one app to another, this is where CarPlay is going to destroy Pioneer. It didn't take that long. So we still get some metadata down here. If I go to the main AppRadio Live menu, the last thing I did music-wise with this was listen to online internet radio, and I'm listening to something else entirely. So there's an inconsistency between the RZA from the Kill Bill soundtrack and somebody that I used to know, which is this thing. If I really want to hear it, then we're going to override, and we're back to that radio station. Now, what if I want to pause? I don't see it. Well, there's a button there, so that's cool. If I want Spotify, I got to do something entirely different. I got to launch the Spotify app on my phone. Now, AppRadio is like, well, what happened? I'm not getting a video signal anymore. I can still listen to Spotify. And then perhaps I'll want to go back to Waze. I can launch Waze from within all of this nonsense, or I can just launch it directly. Waze, again, has to take a moment to figure out whether it's on the phone or on the head unit. And I'm still hearing the bird and the bee, which is cool. If I want to pause this, how do I do it? Well, I guess I'll go into Control Center. And when I do that, AppRadio is disrupted. I can still pause it, but AppRadio is disrupted. Now I go back and I see Waze in phone mode, and maybe it'll figure out that it should go back to AppRadio mode. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, who knows. Meanwhile, I'm driving and maybe I'm crashing because I'm trying to manage all of this. In some of my tests, it's gone back, and some of it hasn't. This time it looks like it hasn't. So what would I do? I guess I would close Waze, open Waze again, or maybe I would kill Waze, go back to Waze, all at 60 miles an hour. This is not distraction-free driving. This is not an improvement, I don't think. And still, okay, there it goes. Now we're back. You know, and in Waze, you've got what's intended to be some shortcuts for navigation. See if it works. Grocery store. I don't even know if it was listening. Yeah, it was listening. Let's see. Yeah, kinda. So that worked. And here we are. And again, I can navigate to this or see the map and all the familiar Waze stuff. Maybe we want to make the screen a little bigger. So we have Waze on the dashboard. Is it improvement over this? Frankly, I'm not sure that it is. Oh boy, that's a mess. I'm not sure that it is an improvement, especially given the delay that you experience in moving from one AppRadio app to another. And that's why Pioneer, I think, is so excited about this AppRadio Live functionality because they've understood that really the way this system has been designed, the way they've designed their own system, if you can stay in one app that does navigation and music and your calendar and news or weather or whatever else, and something that brings it all together into one pane, that looks pretty cool, and that demos pretty well. How well it works while you're driving is kind of another matter. So, if I can stay in one app and navigate around from within that one app, I guess that's pretty cool. But if I'm forced to flip between AppRadio compatible apps this way, then that's not so great. So I guess the battle between Pioneer and Apple, if we're trying to decide whether to adopt Pioneer's AppRadio or Apple's CarPlay, I think AppRadio is going to lose unless the AppRadio Live button can do everything CarPlay can do without all this tedious switching from one app to another. So this has been a quick tour of my AVH4000 NEX, eagerly awaiting the CarPlay firmware from Pioneer. I'll just show you the firmware that I'm running now, which I think is 1.02 or something like that. System, oops, that's not what I meant. System information, firmware information. So this is the firmware that came with this device, released in the spring of 2014. And if you guys have questions or want me to test anything or poke at anything else, let me know. Oh, there's one other thing I wanted to poke at here just to kind of let you see this. When I go into settings to configure all of this, how is all of this arranged? You've got a $50 adapter from Apple that takes Lightning and splits it out to Lightning and HDMI. Lightning is going into USB port 1 on this thing. HDMI is going in, which, by the way, means that if I ask this radio to display HDMI, by God, it'll display HDMI. And here we are. I can't interact with this, but I can play music this way. For what that's worth, which is not very much. But what I was going to point out is that in settings, AV source settings, no, that's not what I meant. Input settings? Smartphone setup. It's set up to work with the digital AV adapter, which is this gadget from Apple. You have the option of making this USB. I don't know why. Because when I do this, AppRadio mode claims to still be available, as well as AHA and Pandora and iPod. But there's a few problems with this. One, there is no AppRadio mode. And two, you can't control the iPod this way anyway, because this AV adapter interferes with the transmission of music and metadata through the USB Lightning connection. So if I hit USB, what I get is sadness, nothing. You got to use HDMI. And when you use HDMI, you're not getting metadata. So if you take out all of this CarPlay nonsense, if you take out all of the AppRadio nonsense, and you just want to use this head unit as a head unit talking to an iPod, the iPod control and the Pandora integration is quite good. When you go to AppRadio, you're adding layers of complexity to get something, and I'm not sure that it's worth it. So anyway, we go back to input-output settings, smartphone setup, and now I have to go using the digital AV adapter. Say yes. iPod is now grayed out. Wasn't working in the first place. And AppRadio mode is still available. And this is the way to get AppRadio to work on this head unit. And there we go. And all of the delays and button pushing and all of the nonsense associated with it. So I've only been playing with this for a day. I'm not that impressed. But I'm really happy to see that Pioneer is working on this. I'm happy to see that there's some competition from Pioneer for Apple's CarPlay. I'm skeptical about Apple's CarPlay for the same reasons, and I've talked quite long enough. So leave your questions, and I'll try to answer them. And thanks for watching, and goodbye, YouTube.